All right, we are speaking with Steve Vai. He's going to be performing this coming up weekend, Sunday, July 16th at the Rialto Theater, kicking off the second leg of his Inviolate World Tour. Am I pronouncing that correct? Inviolate?
Inviolate.
Inviolate. Okay, sorry about that. So you're kicking it off this weekend here in Tucson.
Yes, we're kicking off our American leg. We have been on tour since last summer. We did Europe, and then we did a whole American tour, and then we went back to Europe, did Eastern Europe, and then we did Latin America, and we got home about 2 weeks ago, and now we're kicking off another American tour.
And so that's going to be this coming up Sunday here at the Rialto Theater here in Tucson.
Yeah.
A beautiful venue. Have you been here before to the Rialto?
Oh yeah, yeah, I love it. It's cute. It's kind of it's the exact kind of venues that I like. It's big enough, but it's not too big. You know, it's small enough. It's not too small. There's comfortable seats, and yeah.
I'm looking forward to the concert. I haven't seen you live in quite a long time, but I saw you a bunch of times. Obviously, you played with David Lee Roth. You played with Whitesnake. That's the story I'm going to share with you here in a second. And then you had your solo career as well. And I saw you at a bar in Phoenix way back in '93. I think it was called the Roxy, and you performed there way back when.
Yeah.
But of course, the first time I was turned on to you was from a friend of mine who was a huge Zappa fan. And then he turned me on, and I borrowed this record, which unfortunately I never returned. The Flexible records.
Unfortunately for who?
For him. I have it still. And one of my favorite, I remember listening to the album and suddenly getting lost in this one song. And to me, it was the most trippy thing. So happy. And
okay.
wow, the guitar is suddenly talking, and the
Yeah.
girl's kind of fat. I thought that was a really cool song.
Thank you. You know, there's a lot of hidden technique in that song. I mean, I have a friend, and way back then I would just record anything that anybody did or said, and she went off into this whole kind of silly rant, and at one point I decided to grab the notes in her voice, because every note that every word, it's like a melody. So you attach that to an instrument, and it sounds so peculiar.
Yeah, it was that was my first experience with you. And then of course it was like going, wow, this is really trippy. And then I listened to the record over and over again with headphones back in the day, and then got to see you obviously when you did the record with David Lee, and then obviously moved on to Whitesnake. So it was back, I think, in 89 or 90, you were touring with Whitesnake. I was a newbie in radio, and I was sent to pick you up at this hotel and drive you to the radio station to do the interview. And on the way back from the interview, you mentioned that you were a little hungry, and there was a sub place right around the corner. And my buddy is the biggest Steve Vai fan in the world, happened to be the manager of that Subway.
Okay.
And I took the shot and said, well, let's go to this Subway. You wanted a vegetarian sub, if I remember. We walked in, he's making a sub. And I go, hey, Ronnie, this is, and he dropped the sub he was making. I know. And you autographed a napkin for him. And
I should have autographed the sub.
Probably. He was completely stoked, and still brings that up to me 30 years later, how I brought Steve Vai into his restaurant.
You never know who could be craving a sub.
Exactly. And so I wanted to thank you for that memory, because
thanks for the ride.
No problem. And great concert that night as well. So tell me a little bit about you. In the last couple of years, you've released, I'm going to mispronounce this again, I apologize, Inviolate?
Yeah, that's it, Inviolate.
And then you also released Vai Gash.
Yeah.
Which was actually kind of in your archives for about 30 years.
Yeah, 31 years, yeah.
So did you release them almost simultaneously, and why the long wait on the one?
Well, no, Inviolate came out about a year before.
Okay.
The Vai Gash record. And you know, I have so much stuff in the can, and I've always been kind of ginger with releasing it, because you want to kind of place things appropriately. But once Inviolate came out, the response was so good. I wanted to make a record that really focused on the guitar, but I had the Gash record in the can for 30 years, basically. And that was a record that it was just one of those projects where I was in the middle of something way back then, and I just had this impulse to go into the studio and record this record, and it took about a week, if you can imagine, because that's how fast it went. Because I wanted to make a record. At that time, I was hanging with my friend Johnny Gash Sombrado, and he's a very interesting, amazing kind of a guy. He suffered an accident when he was 21, where he was climbing these high tension towers, and the electricity arced, and it
Oh,
went through him, and he caught fire, and he was covered with 60% of his body was third-degree burns, and he miraculously survived this and came out to California, and his face was untouched, but his whole body was gashed up. And that's how he got the nickname. And we used to ride our motorcycles. We were big Harley enthusiasts. And riding a motorcycle, if you ever talk to a biker, they can wax on poetically about the joys of, being on a Harley, and the feeling of, it's really wonderful, the feeling of just the open road and freedom and empowerment. And I wanted to have some music to listen to when we were riding. And I wanted the music to sort of sound like the way we felt when we rode. And I wanted it to be very straight ahead, 70s, 80s kind of rock. And I just blasted this record out. And when it came time to put the vocals on it, I didn't have a singer available. I tried singing, and it was a disaster because I don't have a rock and roll voice. But then there was Gash, and I didn't know he could sing, and really neither did he, because he wasn't a singer. But I could hear something in his voice, and I dragged him in the studio, and I just couldn't believe what came out of his mouth. It was just so authentic and had so much swag and charisma, and a little bit of comedy. It was kind of lighthearted in a sense. And he blasted through this, and I only recorded 8 songs, and I had to get back to finishing the other project I was working on, and I was planning on finishing up with Gash, but by the time I got to that, he was tragically killed in a motorcycle accident. So I was just so distraught. I took the whole record and threw it on the shelf, and I'd listened to it through the years, and it always made me feel good,
Mhm.
So I just thought, one day I'm going to release it. And I did. And I was so surprised at the response from it. It's so good. It even got on the radio, some tracks.
So when you do this tour, when you kick off the second half of your tour, are you doing primarily instrumental, or are you going to have a singer there to maybe sing some of this stuff? I
No,
know he's down with us.
unfortunately, I don't, there's, this show is a Steve Vai instrumental show,
Okay.
basically. I thought about doing some of the Vai Gash stuff, but I don't have anybody to sing it. And even if I wanted to bring somebody, it's hard to find somebody that can do that. And it's just that, I wouldn't do a lot of it. So
Yeah.
I just opted out.
Probably not worth it if it's just 1 or 2 songs to bring somebody
Yeah.
on the road. Yeah, that totally makes sense. By the way, I was
It's
looking
a
at
great
the
record. It really is.
Oh, it is. His voice is fantastic.
Great.
I did not know that he had passed away. I'm really sorry to hear that.
Yeah. Oh, way back. Yeah.
So I was looking at the video for your latest single, and that guitar, it is like
Are you talking
amazing.
about the Hydra?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. Wow. I mean,
Yeah, it's pretty quirky.
are you bringing that out on Sunday?
Oh yeah.
Okay, cool. I was
Oh.
like, that thing looked like something straight out of a science fiction film.
I know. Well, it is because when I got the idea for the Hydra, I wanted to create an instrument that could carry an entire piece of music.
Hmm.
And so I wanted a bass neck, a 7-string neck tuned down, 12-string. It's got harp strings. It's got a guitar synthesizer and piezo's and sustainers. It's pretty technical, highly technical instrument. And yeah, I could kind of see myself in my mind's eye playing that. And it was a lot of work. It took me like 6 weeks of 15-hour undisturbed days. And I got it. And by the time we were going to go out on tour, I had a shoulder accident, and I had to get surgery. So I couldn't bring the Hydra on the first European leg.
Hmm.
So I couldn't even get my arm over it. And but then after that, by the time we got to America, I healed and I was able to play the Hydra. And we've had it on the American tour, Eastern Europe. I brought it to Latin America, and we got it for this tour.
So you've been doing this how long now? 40
43 years.
43 years. When you first started, did you think that this was going to be a lifelong career, or did you think you'd go into it for all? Because a lot of musicians, when they go into they get lucky if they get one thing, and then they're
Yeah.
in and out. I mean, you've been at this a while, and
Yeah.
you're still successful. And did you think, like, were you thinking that forward back then, or did you?
No. Back then and through it all, there was one thing that when I look back, there was one thing that I did the most, and that was pine for a good idea. Like with everything that was going on in the peripherals, the different bands, the touring, all that, there was always the prime importance to me was, or prime interest was in just finding a new riff, writing that melody that just sounds great, and I was always so moved internally when I would come across something that just felt comfortable and organic and musical and empowering. So that was really it. So as far as looking into the future, I I knew that I didn't know anything about what could happen, but I knew that I just was going to be doing music, that I loved music. I didn't really mind what the complexion of it was, but I knew I was going to be doing the music that I loved. And it turned out that way. I was able to play with all these bands. In the beginning, when I started with Frank Zappa, it was rough for me, really rough, because I was so young, 20, and those tours they were rough tours because we were flying every day. We'd get right from the airport and go right into sound check for hours, where he would write music and record, and then we'd do a show, 2 shows a night usually. And we had to have there was 80 songs in our catalog that Frank had us learn, and every night he would choose the set list right before we went on stage. And about 60% of those 80 songs were death defying on the guitar. So if he picked 15 songs for a show, I didn't know which songs he was going to pick. So I had to be practicing all the time to keep them under my fingers, and also not sleeping and flying on show days every day.
Mm-hmm.
After that tour, I thought, okay, I'm glad that's done. I can't do that anymore. It's too difficult, but I knew it was going to be my life somehow. So I just started focusing on those things that I really enjoyed and appreciated about touring. And by the time I got out with Dave Roth, the touring situation was very different. I mean, with Dave, it was no sound checks, none of that. You show up for the gig, and then the rest of the time you're on, you do whatever you want. So it was very different.
So, what made you want to get into the guitar? Was that your first choice instrument when you were a kid, or was there something else and then you got led over to the guitar? Or did you automatically, when you heard somebody, you went, I want to do that?
Well, the first time I saw a kid playing the guitar, I must have been about 7 or 8. And I got a little spinet organ from my mom. It was about this big when I was 6, on my 6th birthday, on 6/6/66. I turned 6, and I got a little organ. And I didn't really know about the guitar or anything like that. And then I was probably 7 or 8, and I was in my school, and I saw this kid that was about 9 playing the guitar. And the moment I saw the guitar, it's like you have a moment of clarity. Everything seems to go into like slow motion or something. I was stunned because it looked so cool, and it just looked so interesting that this kid was hitting these strings and the sound. And he was just a 9-year-old kid, but to me, he was a god. So that started my love affair with the guitar, but I didn't really pick it up and start playing until I was 12.
What got you in? How did Zappa discover you?
Well, I was a huge Frank fan, and I really enjoyed playing his difficult melodies on the guitar. And I got his phone number from a friend of mine that stole a Rolodex from a studio in New York City. And it
Uh-huh.
had all these phone numbers of all these big, big, huge rock stars and everything, Mick Jagger and Bruce Springsteen, all this stuff. And I'm just sitting in my room playing, and he's going through all these phone numbers and names, and I'm going, cool, wow. And then he got to the Z's, and he goes, oh, and I have Frank Zappa's home phone number. You got what? And I actually called Frank, and he wasn't there, and I got his wife, and she said to call back in 6 months. So I did, and he still wasn't there. So she said, he's on tour, call back in another 6 months. And finally, I was 18, and I was at Berkeley at my friend's apartment, and I called, and Frank answered the phone. And that was my first connection with him. And he allowed me to send him some materials. And from then on, it just,
And then your career took off from there.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So he didn't discover you, you discovered him.
Well,
in a roundabout way. I mean, the
we
connection.
discovered each other.
Exactly. That's fantastic.
I discovered the fact that while I enjoyed playing with Frank, I got to play with my hero, and he discovered a kid that could play his very complex melodies on the guitar. And for Frank, he was a composer in a way, so it worked.
Speaking of composing, I was just reading that recently in Holland, you played with I may mispronounce this, the Metropole Orchestra.
Metropole, yeah.
A Metropole Orchestra.
Yeah.
What was that like for you? Was that kind of cool having, like, usually you're in a rock setting. You're with an orchestra. What was that like?
Well, I've before I even touched the guitar, I wanted to be a composer, ever since I was a little kid, when I got that little organ. And I thought that somehow instinctually, I understood the language of music. I knew that, okay, this does that and that. Oh, I get it. And the idea of composition seemed so infinite to me and so creative. Like, you could take a sheet of paper and have all these musicians, and you could write whatever is in your head, and they're going to play it. And that to me was like heaven in a cup, and that's what I did a lot of that. Even in high school, I wrote my first orchestral score. So all through the years, I've been like a closet composer. It was just always very difficult to get your music played, especially if you're a rock guitar player. Orchestras, like any other genre, they got their snobs, and it was just difficult to get in until there was one guy, Co de Kloot, and he was in Holland, and he was friends with Frank. And Frank hooked us up way back in the 80s. And Co and I co-worked at National Public Radio, and he would put on all these events. And he came to me one day and he goes, Steve, I think you're a great guitar player, but I think you're an undiscovered composer. So, I think, yeah, sure. And he solicited the Dutch government to put on this incredible concert. We did 5 shows with them, and the Metropole Orchestra is a special kind of an orchestra. They're like 60-piece, and they're in Holland, and they're hip, like you can take to them quasi-fusion rock classical music, and they eat it up. So that was the kind of the music I was writing, So I did these concerts, and we recorded them, and they were very successful. And I released a record called Sound Theories. And that's the moniker I use for all my classical music. So all through the years, I've been composing tons of orchestral music. And after I did the Metropole gig, the floodgates opened up, and all these orchestras started contacting me. And on my Story of Light tour, I played with about 9 different orchestras around the world. I was in Poland, I was in Russia, South America. There were so many. Even Colorado, I played with the Colorado Orchestra. And I could never get the LA Phil to work with me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but the night is young. But so I had all this music, and I knew one day I wanted to record it. It's very expensive and time consuming, but I did it. And I did it last year. I spent 3 weeks in Holland with the Metropole. And then I spent 2 weeks in Tampere, Finland, with the Tampa Bay Philharmonic, recording very large pieces of music. And I did a concert with the Metropole a couple of months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a concert coming up in September with Tampa Bay Philharmonic.
And is that in Finland?
Yeah.
Okay. Any chance of you bringing any of this to the States when this tour is over?
I'd like to, of course, but I have to, you have to find the right orchestras.
True.
American orchestras are just they're very different, So I would like to, but there's so many offers now to play the orchestra music around the world.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to beg America to play it.
No, I understand. Now, you mentioned that you were recording with them. Have you released that? Or are you going to?
It's all sitting on the shelf. I have about 4 albums worth of orchestral music.
Wow.
I don't know when I'm going to put it out. I hope it doesn't take 30 years like the Gash record.
So what can people expect this coming up Sunday as you kick off the second half of this tour here in Tucson? What can people expect to maybe haven't seen you in a while?
You're going to see me in my absolute prime, I think. I mean, of course, the certain things wane, but when you find what you really love doing and you just give it your full attention, decade after decade, you go deeper into it. And when I think about it, because everybody wonders, what's my function? What should I be doing here? And I keep getting this image of, you're a service provider, you have to entertain people, you're an entertainer. And so the connection that you have with your instrument as a musician, or the connection you have with your imagination as a writer or anything, that when you give it it deepens, and you go deeper into it. And as a guitar player, you want to connect with the notes and connect with people with those notes. And I know this sounds kind of abstract, but it's a psychological attention. And it works because when you as a performer are really deep into what you're doing and connected, the viewers feel connected. So you're going to see that at this concert more than I was ever able to deliver before, I think. And it's great. It's instrumental guitar and all that, but it's very melodious. There's beautiful melodies, and there's very intense. There's a great intensity, but it's not intensity like a wild rock show.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different kind of an inner focused intensity, and it's very difficult to talk about, yourself when you're about your show. But I can tell you, if you go with no prejudice and you watch this show, you're going to be fascinated.
Well, I'm looking forward to this show. I think the last time I saw one of your concerts was the G3 tour.
Yeah, that's great.
With Joe, and I think I saw a couple of them, but Eric Johnson.
Yep.
And
we're going to be doing that again in January.
That was going to be my next question. You have which guitar players are going to be involved besides you?
Me, Joe, and Eric.
Oh, that version again.
Yeah, Joe decided he wanted to do this, and I think it's great. I always love doing the G3 stuff.
So that is great news to hear. Yeah, because that was going to be one of my questions. So wow, I'm looking forward to that. So hopefully, when this tour is over, we'll get some news, and hopefully you'll either get to Phoenix or hopefully Tucson, and bring it.
We're going to be doing. Eventually, we're going to do it all, but maybe not with G3. I'm not. It's still getting worked out.
Well, fantastic. Hey, Steve, I appreciate you taking time. I'm looking forward to the show on Sunday night here at the Rialto Theater. Tickets still available. You can get them at klpx.com or at therialtotheater.com. Anything you want to say to Tucson before we wrap things up?
Well, thank you for the support, and I'm really looking forward to this show. And I love the fact that we're kicking it off there in Tucson. And come on down, and thank you.
Oh, one more thing. Website?
Vi.com. You can get tickets. I don't know how many are left, but you can get tickets at Vi.com. And also you can get Evo Premium Experience tickets, which is really great. We go all out for that. I sit and I talk with people for like an hour, and then they can watch the sound check. We sound checked for a long time.
Oh, wow.
Photos and all that stuff, and you can get a stage tour. It's really nice. It's a important part of the whole touring experience for me. And you can get tickets for that at vie.com.
A great way for you to hang out with your fans as well.
Yes, very much.
Absolutely. Hold on real quick, Steve. I'm going to wrap things up. Again, folks, all the details that you need to know, you can find at klpx.com or rialtotheater.com or at vie.com.
Mm-hmm.